Why words matter more than you think when dealing with a narcissist. The most dangerous moment in a narcissistic relationship is not the screaming match. It's the calm conversation where you think, if I just explain it better this time, they'll finally understand. That moment is where people lose themselves. Picture this. You rehearse your words all day. You promise yourself you'll stay calm, rational, respectful. You choose your sentences carefully, trimming anything that might sound too emotional. You walk into the conversation believing that clarity will save you. And then somehow you walk out feeling smaller, confused, ashamed, and strangely guilty, even though you didn't do anything wrong. That's not an accident. That's how narcissistic communication works. Here's the truth most people don't realize until it costs them years of their life. With a narcissist, words are not used to understand you. They are used to measure you, to test how much emotional access they still have, to see whether you're still reachable, reactive, and controllable. They are not listening to what you say. They are listening for what it does to you. Your tone, your hesitation, your need to be fair, your urge to clarify, your frustration, your pain. Those are not signs of weakness in healthy relationships. They are signs of humanity. But in narcissistic dynamics, those same qualities become leverage. This is why conversations with narcissists feel like emotional quicksand. The more you talk, the deeper you sink. The more you explain, the more material they have to twist. The more honest you are, the more exposed you become. And the most shocking realization of all? You were never meant to win the conversation. The narcissist doesn't want resolution. They don't want mutual understanding. They don't even want agreement. What they want is engagement, emotional movement, proof that they still matter enough to affect you. That's why you can say all the right things and still lose. Because the moment your voice cracks, your breath changes, or your body tenses, the narcissist has already received what they came for. This is the part no one prepares you for. The issue is not that you don't know what to say. The issue is that you believe words are the solution. They're not. Words are currency in narcissistic relationships. And every emotional sentence is a payment you didn't realize you were making. But once you see this, everything changes. You stop trying to be understood. You stop chasing closure. You stop explaining yourself to someone who profits from misunderstanding you. And that's when real power begins. Because shutting down a narcissist permanently doesn't start with clever comebacks or perfect scripts. It starts with understanding that not all conversations are meant to be survived the same way. If this resonates, and you want more content that exposes narcissistic dynamics clearly, calmly, and without shame, take a moment to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. Your support helps this channel continue creating honest, empowering videos that help people reclaim their peace. Now, a quick question for you. When dealing with a narcissist, which do you believe is more powerful? A. Explaining yourself clearly and calmly. B. Saying less and protecting your emotional energy. Comment A or B below. I'm curious which one you choose and why. Who you're really talking to. The psychology behind narcissistic communication. One of the most destabilizing experiences when dealing with a narcissist is realizing often far too late that you were never having the same conversation they thought they were having. You believed you were speaking to another adult, someone capable of reflection, accountability, and shared reality. But the person across from you was operating under a completely different psychological framework. To understand why narcissistic conversations feel so disorienting, you have to understand this first. Narcissists do not experience communication as connection. They experience it as positioning. Every interaction is unconsciously filtered through a single question. Who is in control right now? This is why narcissistic communication feels tense even when no one is raising their voice. the emotional stakes are always high. Because the conversation is not about the topic on the surface. It's about hierarchy, power, and emotional leverage. Michael didn't understand this at first. Working in a fast-paced office environment in Chicago, he assumed professionalism would protect him. He prepared facts, documented his work, and spoke calmly during meetings. Yet every discussion with his manager left him doubting himself. Small comments lingered. Vague criticisms surfaced. Praise was inconsistent and conditional. What Michael didn't realize was that he wasn't being evaluated, he was being regulated. His reactions, his anxiety, his effort to prove himself were stabilizing someone else's fragile sense of superiority. At the core of narcissistic communication is profound internal insecurity. Narcissists do not possess stable self-worth. Instead, they borrow it, they extract it. They regulate their inner chaos by influencing the emotional states of others. That's why they provoke, why they contradict themselves, why they shift narratives, why they accuse you of things you never did. Confusion is not a side effect, it's a tool. When you're confused, you engage more. When you engage more, they feel powerful. This is also why logic fails. Logic requires shared reality. Narcissistic communication does not operate in reality. It operates in emotional impact. What matters is not whether something is true, but whether it destabilizes you enough to regain their sense of control. Many survivors describe conversations with narcissists as addictive and exhausting at the same time. That's because narcissistic dynamics closely resemble emotional addiction. The narcissist is constantly seeking a hit, a reaction, a shift, a visible impact. Anger works, tears work, defensiveness works. Even calm explanations work, if they come from emotional effort. And like any addiction, tolerance builds. What once triggered a response no longer satisfies. The provocations escalate. Understanding this is not about labeling or demonizing. It's about clarity. When you realize you're not speaking to someone who wants understanding, you stop blaming yourself for failing to achieve it. Michael eventually noticed something unsettling. The moments he stayed neutral, truly neutral, were the moments his manager seemed irritated, restless, even unsettled. There was nothing to grab onto, nothing to extract. That discomfort wasn't hostility. It was exposure. Because when emotional leverage disappears, the narcissistic system destabilizes. There is no script for mutual respect, no fallback for emotional neutrality, no reward for calm presence. Once you understand who you're really talking to, you stop trying to reach them where they cannot meet you. And that realization is the foundation of every boundary that follows. The rule that changes everything: emotional detachment as a communication strategy. There is a moment in every narcissistic dynamic when you realize that nothing you do emotionally makes things better. Caring more doesn't help. Explaining more doesn't help. Staying calmer doesn't help. Trying harder doesn't help. That realization is painful, but it is also the doorway to freedom. The rule that changes everything is not about what you say. It's about what you withhold. Emotional detachment is often misunderstood. Many people hear the phrase and imagine coldness, punishment, or cruelty. In reality, emotional detachment is none of those things. It is the quiet decision to stop offering your inner world as a bargaining chip. When you detach emotionally, you are not trying to hurt the narcissist. You are simply refusing to let your nervous system be recruited into their regulation strategy. Michael arrived at this understanding slowly. After months of leaving work meetings in Chicago feeling tense, keyed up, and oddly ashamed, he noticed a pattern. The days he went home exhausted were not the days he had performed poorly. They were the days he had cared the most. He had monitored his tone. He had rehearsed his words. He had tried to anticipate reactions. And every ounce of that effort had been absorbed by someone else. Emotional detachment begins before you speak. It begins in the body. It looks like grounding yourself instead of scanning for approval. It looks like breathing deeply instead of bracing for impact. It looks like reminding yourself, quietly and firmly, I am not here to manage this person's emotions. This is where many people struggle. We are conditioned to believe that if someone is upset, we must fix it. If someone is dissatisfied, we must explain. If someone misunderstands us, we must clarify. Narcissistic dynamics exploit that conditioning. When you detach emotionally, you stop performing those reflexes. Michael tested this one afternoon. His manager questioned a decision Michael had made weeks earlier, something that had already been approved. Normally, Michael would have defended himself, walked through his reasoning, offered context. Instead, he paused. He felt his feet on the floor. He kept his voice even. He said, "I'll review that." And then he stopped talking. The silence felt heavy. His manager pressed, probing for justification, emotion, tension, something. Michael stayed neutral. The conversation ended awkwardly. For the first time, Michael didn't leave the room dysregulated. His manager did. That's the shift emotional detachment creates. The discomfort moves back to where it belongs. Emotional detachment is not indifference to reality. It is discernment. It is recognizing that not every emotional invitation deserves a response. It is understanding that access to you is earned, not owed. You are allowed to care deeply and still detach strategically. You are allowed to be compassionate and still be unavailable. You are allowed to remain kind without remaining open. When you detach emotionally, communication becomes cleaner, simpler, and safer. There is less urgency, less overthinking, less self-betrayal, and most importantly, you stop leaking energy into conversations that were never designed to nourish you. Emotional detachment is not the end of connection. It is the beginning of sovereignty. What to say and not say. Language that starves narcissistic supply. Once emotional detachment is in place, language becomes precise, not persuasive, not explanatory, precise. This is where most people stumble, because they assume the goal of speaking is to be understood. With a narcissist, the goal is different: to communicate without feeding the mechanism that keeps the dynamic alive. Narcissistic supply does not come from words themselves. It comes from effort, from the emotional labor behind the words, from the subtle signals that say, "I'm invested in how you receive this." When that effort disappears, the language lands differently. This is why shorter statements are more powerful than eloquent ones. A narcissist thrives on open-ended conversations. On nuance they can distort. On explanations they can challenge. Clarity threatens that system. Michael learned this the hard way before he learned it the right way. Early on, he believed professionalism meant being thorough. When questioned at work, he responded with context, reasoning, and transparency. Each sentence invited a counter-argument. Each clarification opened a new angle of attack. The conversation never ended because it was never meant to. The shift happened when Michael stopped trying to convince and started simply informing. Effective language with a narcissist is closed, not collaborative. It sounds plain because it is not trying to perform. Statements like, "That doesn't work for me," or "I'm not available," are not cold. They are complete. They don't ask permission. They don't invite debate. They don't carry emotional hooks. Equally important is what you do not say. You don't explain why unless required. You don't justify your boundary. You don't soften your message to protect their feelings. You don't preemptively apologize for having a need. Every extra sentence is an opportunity for the narcissist to regain footing. This is where silence becomes essential. Silence is not passive. It is containment. When you state something clearly and then stop talking, You remove the stimulus that narcissists rely on. The discomfort that follows is not failure, it's withdrawal. They are waiting for you to rescue the moment with reassurance or elaboration. When you don't, the power dynamic shifts. Michael noticed that after he delivered a brief response and stayed quiet, the pressure increased briefly. His manager would rephrase the question, push for clarification, or hint at consequences. Michael stayed steady. He repeated the same neutral statement or ended the interaction. Over time, the probing decreased. Another trap to avoid is emotional mirroring. Narcissists often escalate tone to pull you up to their level. Matching that energy even calmly keeps the exchange alive. Neutral language paired with neutral tone creates friction in the narcissistic script. There is also a category of phrases that feel mature but quietly feed supply. I just want us to understand each other. That wasn't my intention. Let me explain what I meant. These statements come from integrity, but they invite interpretation and manipulation. They keep you in the arena. Language that starves narcissistic supply is not dramatic. It doesn't sound powerful. It doesn't feel satisfying in the moment. That's precisely why it works. You are not trying to win the exchange. You are closing it. When your words stop offering access to your inner world, the narcissist has nothing to consume. And when there is nothing to consume, the dynamic begins to collapse not loudly, not theatrically, but decisively. That is the quiet strength of saying less. The energy behind the words, becoming an uninteresting target. At a certain point, you can say all the right things and still remain a target. This is the moment many people find confusing and discouraging. They've learned to keep their words short. They've stopped explaining. They've practiced restraint. And yet, the narcissist keeps circling. That's because words are only half the message. Narcissists are exquisitely sensitive to energy. They track emotional availability the way a predator tracks movement. If your words are neutral, but your energy is still open, still hopeful, still bracing, still trying, they feel it. And they stay. Becoming an uninteresting target has very little to do with acting and everything to do with internal withdrawal. Sarah didn't understand this at first. At a Thanksgiving gathering in Los Angeles, she prepared carefully. She planned her responses. She promised herself she wouldn't react to her mother's familiar jabs and subtle criticisms. On the surface, she did everything right. Her answers were polite. Her tone was calm. Her words were brief. But inside, she was still alert. Still waiting. Still hoping that this time, maybe, things would be different. Her mother felt that immediately. The comments continued. The pressure didn't ease. Because while Sarah's words had changed, her emotional availability had not. She was still present in the way her mother had always relied on: watchful, responsive, emotionally reachable. The shift came later, quietly, and not in the way Sarah expected. It wasn't anger that changed things. It was grief. At some point during the evening, Sarah realized she was no longer hurt by what was being said. She was simply tired. Not the sharp, reactive exhaustion she knew well, but a softer, deeper fatigue. The kind that comes from finally accepting that the relationship she wanted was not the relationship she had. When that acceptance settled in, her energy changed. She stopped leaning forward emotionally. She stopped monitoring the room. She stopped scanning for meaning in every remark. Her responses stayed the same, but something fundamental had withdrawn. She was no longer offering herself as a participant. And that's when the dynamic shifted. The comments lost momentum. The attempts at provocation grew awkward. The narcissistic system, suddenly deprived of its usual feedback loop, faltered. This is the essence of becoming uninteresting. Not withholding words, but withdrawing emotional investment. It looks like calm that isn't performative, like silence that isn't tense, like presence without vigilance. You are there, but you are no longer available in the way you once were. This stage often comes with loss. You may grieve the fantasy of being seen, understood, or chosen. You may mourn the version of yourself who believed love could be earned through patience or effort. That grief is not a setback. It is the price of freedom. Narcissists lose interest when there is nothing to hook into. No urgency. No emotional charge. No invisible labor happening beneath the surface. When your energy becomes neutral, not guarded, not hostile, just complete, the narcissist feels it as absence. And absence is not something they know how to chase for long. Becoming uninteresting is not about disappearing. It's about returning to yourself. And when you do, the dynamic doesn't end with a dramatic confrontation. It ends quietly, because there is nothing left to feed it. What shutting them down permanently really looks like in real life. When people hear the phrase, shutting a narcissist down permanently, they often imagine a dramatic ending, a final conversation, a perfectly delivered line, a moment where the narcissist finally understands, apologizes, or collapses under the weight of truth. That moment almost never comes. And if you're waiting for it, you're still tethered to the dynamic. In real life, permanent shutdown is quiet. It doesn't announce itself. It doesn't feel victorious at first. In fact, it can feel strangely empty. Laura didn't experience closure the way movies promise it. There was no final heart-to-heart near Central Park. No admission of wrongdoing. No emotional release. What she noticed instead was something subtler. Fewer messages, less urgency, a gradual fading of tension. The silence wasn't hostile. It was simply uninterested. Michael saw it differently. In Chicago, the shift at work didn't come with an apology or acknowledgement. His manager didn't suddenly change. What changed was access. Meetings grew shorter. The probing questions slowed. The pressure moved elsewhere. Michael wasn't winning. He just wasn't feeding the system anymore. And for Sarah, the change wasn't even immediate. After Thanksgiving in Los Angeles, there was a brief escalation. A few emotionally charged messages. A return to old guilt hooks. Then, over time, something unfamiliar settled in. Space. This is what permanent shutdown actually looks like. At first, there is often a spike. Narcissists sense loss of control the way others sense danger. They may escalate briefly, more contact, sharper comments, emotional bait. This is not failure. It is confirmation that something has changed. If you remain consistent, the system adapts. Narcissists do not pursue what no longer responds. Eventually, attention shifts, not because they grew, but because the return on investment disappeared. For the person stepping out of the dynamic, this phase can feel unsettling. Without constant emotional stimulation, your nervous system may feel restless. Peace can feel unfamiliar, even boring. You may second-guess yourself. You may wonder if you were too harsh, too distant, too much. This is where the real work begins. Shutting someone down permanently is not about controlling them. It's about reclaiming yourself. It's about learning who you are when you are not reacting, explaining, or bracing for impact. Many people discover grief here. Not for the narcissist, but for the version of themselves who tried so hard. The one who believed clarity would fix it. The one who stayed longer than they should have. That grief is not weakness. It is integration. Permanent shutdown means the narcissist no longer has a role in your inner world. They may still exist on the periphery, in shared spaces, workplaces, or family systems, but they no longer dictate your emotional weather. There is no final line, no grand ending, just a steady return of energy, a growing sense of self-trust, the quiet relief of realizing you don't need to win, prove, or be understood by someone who was never listening. You didn't shut them down by force. You shut the door by walking away from the supply they needed. And on the other side of that door is not emptiness. It's your life finally undisturbed. Conclusion. The quiet power of walking away. When you step back and look at the journeys of Laura, Michael, and Sarah, a single truth connects all of their stories. None of them won by saying the perfect thing. They found freedom by changing their relationship to engagement itself. Laura didn't get closure from her ex in New York. What she gained instead was distance, emotional distance that slowly dissolved the chaos she had been carrying. Michael didn't defeat his narcissistic manager in Chicago with arguments or evidence. He became unreachable in the ways that mattered most. And Sarah didn't transform her relationship with her mother in Los Angeles through confrontation. She changed it by grieving what would never be, and choosing peace over hope that kept hurting her. Their stories teach us something profound. Shutting a narcissist down permanently is not an external act. It is an internal shift. The lesson is not about becoming cold, cruel, or detached from life. It is about learning discernment, knowing where your energy belongs and where it does not. When you stop offering your emotions, explanations, and nervous system as fuel, the narcissistic dynamic loses its power. What once felt overwhelming becomes distant. What once consumed you no longer defines you. In your own life, this lesson applies wherever you feel drained, small, or constantly on edge around someone. You don't need permission to protect your emotional world. You don't need a dramatic ending to move forward. You only need consistency, clarity, and the courage to choose yourself. Disclaimer. This video is for educational and informational purposes only. It is not a substitute for professional diagnosis, psychological evaluation, or therapy from a licensed mental health professional. Now, a quick question for you. What do you think creates real freedom from a narcissistic dynamic? A. Saying the perfect final words. B. Withdrawing emotional energy and staying consistent. Comment A or B below. And I'd really love to hear your perspective. Have you experienced something similar? Or do you see this differently? Share your thoughts in the comments so everyone can learn from each other. If this content resonated with you, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Your support helps keep these conversations going and gives this channel the motivation to continue creating meaningful, healing content for you.